Hello, I want to welcome you to ProjectManager.com and our webinar today on how to manage projects. Hello, my name is Jennifer Witt and I'm the Program Director for ProjectManager.com. Today we want you to be involved with us. We've got several ways. We're very social, and as you listen to this webinar today, we invite you to tweet the tips you might hear that might be helpful for other project managers. So if you have a Twitter account, all you have to do is log in to your Twitter account, and as you see in the top right-hand corner, you can type what's happening. We have some codes here that you can use, some codes and hashtags. So you can use @ProjectTips using the hashtag Project Manager. For instance, up at the top I have one @ProjectTips and Trends in 2012 for Project Managers. And you can see that comes up on my own Twitter account. And then as well, we have ProjectManager.com has a very active LinkedIn group, has over 100,000 members, so you can definitely leverage the community of project managers on other questions you might have. So we invite you from, as you go along, start a discussion and get others involved in questions you might have of your own on how to manage projects. So today's webinar, I want to cover the agenda that we're going to talk about. Today, this session is a basic intro to project management. Some of the most common questions I have and some of the most common issues or problems we have is just some of the basic principles in how to manage projects. And there's so much going on. It's easy to understand how one can get rusty or may need to go back and review some of the project management tips and techniques, or maybe even some best practices. I come from a family of sports and was an athlete myself, and I know that every spring I had spring training, so I had to go back to the basics and learn the basics. So today, consider this as a basic spring training or boot camp and reminders of some of the basic project management principles. So for those of you who may be reviewing this webinar, you may be have managed projects for years, so consider this a refresher. Some of you reviewing this webinar may be managing projects for the first time, and you have many questions, and how do I get from point A to point B, or what am I supposed to do when? Which are some of the great questions you have in project management. But we're going to actually go through the project management life cycle today, step by step, and going to introduce some of the concepts, some of the principles, some of the terminology, and hopefully answer some of the questions you might have. We're also going to provide a roadmap because, again, some of the questions are, how do I get from here to there? So we're going to provide a roadmap for you in how to navigate, and if you find yourself lost in a project, how to get back on track. We're also going to provide some project management resources and give you some ideas on where you can go for additional information for your projects. And then, last but not least, next steps. One of the main things that I like to know once I've had a training or session or overview is, like, where do I go from here? What are my next steps? So we want to provide you some ideas of next steps that you can make on your own to implement some of these strategies. So for the project management life cycle, I'm sure no matter where you've been, this probably looks familiar to you. Some of you may have heard of the life cycle of plan, do, check, and act. Well, this is similar. This is the project life cycle. And for those of you who may be familiar with PMI, the Project Management Institute, who also has come up with the PMBOK guide, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. We're going by some of the basic principles that you may see familiar from the PMBOK guide. So the project life cycle that PMI and the PMBOK guide references, as well as some of the other methodologies that you might have seen from, if you're familiar with Prince and the Prince 2 methodology or some of the other methodologies you may have seen. But the life cycle is initiating, planning, executing, and controlling, and closing. So if you see this cyclic life cycle, it goes counterclockwise. So it begins with the yellow. If on your screen you can see colors on your screen, starting at initiating in the yellow, it goes to the planning part of the life cycle, to the executing and controlling, and to the closing. So some of you may be in some environments, or you may see some projects as I've seen, and I've actually have to admit I've done myself. Maybe some of the projects have gotten ahead of themselves. Maybe they've actually skipped the initiating or the planning parts of the life cycle, and they've gone straight directly into executing and controlling. But so today we want to start from beginning to end and talk about each one of those. So here is the different parts of the life cycle here. What we're looking at, if you'll see on your screen, 4 different blocks here. And underneath you'll see the initiating, planning, executing and controlling, and the closing phases. One thing I want to outline on this page is the outputs coming from each one. So starting from going from the left-hand side of your screen to the right-hand side, if we start with the initiating part of the life cycle, one of the major outputs, as you may know, is a project charter. So some people may say, we don't do project charters. Well, actually, in some form or fashion, you probably do. You just might call it something different. As a matter of fact, in some organizations, you may be referencing this as maybe a statement of work, something that's generated from there, or a business case, some document that actually gives the authority and approval to move forward on a project. In the next part of the life cycle is the planning phase, the planning process. The main output of the planning process that we're going to be talking about today is the project plan. And the project plan is composed of many different plans that we'll talk about today, such as the risk management plan, some of the other plans that are broken down. So that gives you, think of that as the plan that you're going to use in the next phase. Consider that your execution plan. So the next part of the life cycle that we're going to talk about is executing and controlling. So that has to do with the performance reports, issue logs, risk logs, change logs, deliverables. So in this part of the life cycle, we'll talk more in depth today about each action that takes to execute the plan, and some of the things that we have to do to actually control it, meaning if it gets off track, if it gets off schedule, if you notice it's out of budget, then these are some of the mechanisms that we use to actually get the project back on track. And then last but not least is the closing process of the life cycle. And I don't know about you, but I've seen on some projects where before the project ever ends, part of the team starts disbanding, and many of the closing activities are not done or not completed. So you as the project manager is left with holding the project bag, and you don't have the many different things that you need to actually close the project out formally. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today are some of the outputs from the closing phase are the user acceptance and their final approvals, some of the final reports indicating the finals versus the actuals, project documentation that needs to be archived for future reference if you ever need to go back and look at anything. Many projects are executed in maybe a phased approach. So maybe one phase is completed, so you'll need to reference those documents for later. If you happen to be working on a technology project, you'll want the documentations maybe to reference for requirements or the next phase. If it's construction, again, or any type of project, you want to be able to archive those documents for members of the project team to access later, or new project team members. And last but not least, the lessons learned, because the lessons learned should be documented along the way. However, formally, reviewed with the project team. Again, if you happen to be on a project that has a second phase or next phase, you'll want to be sure to review those lessons that you've learned so as to not to repeat some of the things that maybe worked against you during the project, but also you want to leverage and continue doing some of the things that worked really well for your team or you learned that actually enhanced your performance along the way. So you want to keep doing the good things and stop doing the bad things. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to be spending quite a bit of time looking at this slide because we're actually going to go through each one of these, but we call this the roadmap, a project roadmap. And as you can see, starting from left to right, you see how this aligns with the project life cycle. It actually shows the project initiation, project planning, project execution, and project closure. So let's start from the beginning. So what happens here? These are some of the, if you look here, you see the start. If you look at project initiation, the project initiation process of the project life cycle, and you start, actually what's happening there is you're developing a business case. So you as the project manager may not be responsible for actually developing the project, the business case, but you are involved in coordinating all of the people, all of the members involved, required to put together the formal business case for this project. Again, in your environment, you may not refer to this as a business case, but this is a document that justifies why are we doing this. Many times we can get so focused on the task of the project, or we're midstream in the project and things are getting tough and timelines and deadlines and budgets are getting cut, and people forget why they're actually doing this project. So the business case is something that you can always go back to keep people aligned in why are we doing what we're doing. So you develop the business case, and again, you as the project manager are the one responsible for coordinating all of the members who provide input into the business case. So once you do that, you undertake a feasibility study, actually take the information in the business case and people on a team, or you pull people together to do a feasibility study and actually see, is this feasible for us to do? Is it worth our while? If we spend money on this project, are we going to make more than what it's going to cost us? Many companies now, especially today, as they're coming out with new products, they're trying to go to market with new products, new enhancements to meet some of the market needs. So many companies want to be first to market. So sometimes during the feasibility study, they're looking at, can things really be done, because they're actually doing things that have never been done before. So you want to see, is it even feasible for us to do it? If you consider technology, you may have some ideas on technology, but maybe your ideas or what you want to do might be a little ahead of your time. You've got to look at, if you roll out a new product or new technology, if companies are creating new construction projects, or even in real estate, new products to the market, are your customers ready for what you're going to roll out? So feasibility study is a big part of what happens in the initiation phase. Then once you do that, you establish the terms of reference, or the terms of the agreement. How are we going to do this? So everyone agrees to the terms. And then you appoint a project team. At this point, once you've developed your business case, you've determined that, yes, this is feasible to do, we have the resources, we have the where and means to do this, it's going to pay off for us to do this project, and you agree to the terms. Now you want to put your project team in place. So you begin determining what resources do we need, who do we need on this team. Then set up a project office. It's important before you actually go into the thrust of a project to actually set up a project office. And what does that mean? That can mean different things to people because project sizes, the size of the project, the size of the team may be different. So some projects are small, some are complex and relative in size. It could be you could have a few team members, you could have hundreds of team members. Your team members could be co-located in the same building, yet they could be global. So you need to set up a project office that fits your needs of your project. So you don't want to do overkill, but you just want to make sense of what you do. But setting up a project office means things, for instance, like setting up your templates. Where are we going to house documentation? Are we going to have project notebooks? Are we going to have a server? Are people going to access documents and files through something like a SharePoint or through some type of project management software? But how is your project team going to collaborate? So it's important to set this up, get your team, get your project mobilized before you actually begin engaging. Because now at the next phase of the life cycle, when you begin doing your project planning, it's important that project team members can collaborate with each other and have easy access to each other. And then before you go into the project planning process of the life cycle, at this point you want to perform a phase review. So what does that mean? So this is great. Some environments may call this a gate review. Some call it a phase review. But what this means is before you close out or before you go to the next process of the life cycle, you want to make sure everything's been done. So think of this as, say, a checklist or a review or an assessment. Have we done everything? Do we have everything that we need in order to go into the next phase? Because if you don't have the information, if you don't have the approval, you don't have the team, you don't have your project office set up, so you don't want to get ahead of yourself and then not be ready. It's the hurry up and wait game. So perform your phase in review. If you find that you do not have everything, then you need to be sure to go back and get the project deliverables or the outputs that you need, because the previous slide that we showed with the outputs are important as inputs into the next phase. So the outputs from the project initiation phase serve as the inputs into the project planning. So once you've done your phase review and you have the okay to go forward, then now we're into the planning. Okay, here's where the fun begins, because now everyone's decided we're a go to do this project. Now we have to determine, or we have to get the people involved to determine how are we going to go about doing this. So we need some people to go through and dice through or come up with the details of this project. So what does that mean? So one of the primary things that we create here is a project plan. So if you think of a project plan as a execution plan, again, my background is sports, so in sports you have an execution plan. So for every game that you're playing, you know what the plays are, you know who's going to be playing what position, and how long and how to do the plan. If you think of maybe cooking, this is your recipe. Or if you're building a house, consider this as your blueprint. But the project plan is the plan that you use to determine how we're going to go about doing this project. It's the major output of the project planning phase. So you create your project plan, and previously on the previous screen, on the outputs, we mentioned that the project plan is composed of several subplans. So the subplans look like this. We have a resource plan. What resources do we need? That's resources meaning people. It could mean supplies. It could be materials. The financial plan, what money, what budget, how are we going to get money? Do we need to finance it? How are we going to get the money for this project? Who's going to be paying for it? The quality plan, risk plan, acceptance plan, communication plan, procurement, how we're going to contract suppliers, and then again the phase in review. So let's take some of these sub-plans and let's talk about these a little bit in more detail. So again, the resource plan. The resource plan is not just people, it's also supplies. For instance, those who may be in aviation, some aviation is where are we going to get equipment? Who are going to be our vendors? How are we going to get those resources? Who are going to be the people? Who are going to be the people involved? Do we have to source them? Are we going to insource them internally from our team? Are we going to use contract partners? Are we going to use vendors? Are we going to do an RFP? So the plan tells you how. It also tells how. It identifies what resources you need. It indicates how you go about getting the resources. It also indicates who needs to approve those resources in order to get them. Then we create the financial part of the plan. Again, that has to do with finances. How are we going to finance the project? Does the money come from a cash reserve? Is a certain business unit paying for it? Are you in partnership to pay for it? If anything changes on the financial plan, how are we going to do it? What is the process? Does it come through a certain board? Are certain people authorized to make those decisions? Who gets the final approval of anything changing on the financial plan? Then we create the quality plan. Quality meaning what quality statistics or what quality features are involved for the products. For instance, if you're producing a product or if you're producing a service, what quality measures have to be met in order for this to be approved. So there's certain statistics involved in the quality plan. Who comes up with those metrics? Who sets them? Where do they come from? Some may be outside standards. For instance, if you're in manufacturing of certain steel or plastics or other products may have certain industry standards that have to be met. How do you go about reviewing those? Who actually has the final approval for those? What is the process to get that done? Then the risk plan. You've got to create a risk plan. So a lot of times many people are good at identifying the risk, but maybe not so good at identifying, okay, now that we've identified the risk, how do we go about assessing the risk, the impact of it? Is this a small risk or large risk? Many times people get confused where they think something may be a small risk, but it could have a really huge impact. Or something could sound like a huge risk, something really big, but if it really happens, it doesn't have much of an impact. So it's very important to identify your risk plan, how the process that risk are identified, how risk are evaluated, and how risk are mitigated. So having a mitigation strategy. But all of those things are outlined in the risk management part of the plan. You also have people identified who approve the mitigation strategy, who approve what's done on mitigating those risks. Then you create an acceptance plan. For instance, the user acceptance, if it's a product or it's a service, what is the plan that is going to be used on this project to accept the deliverables that are going to be produced as a result of the project execution phase. So you need to know what are the acceptance criteria, who's involved in testing those, who's involved in giving the final approval of the acceptance test. So that plan identifies the process and the people to approve that. Then a communication plan. Many of the projects that I've seen that have been derailed or maybe categorized as failing projects have to do in the area of communication. Either no communication is happening or maybe an extreme of too much communication is happening, but that too much communication is providing too much information to the wrong people in the wrong format. So one of the most important things of the communication plan is identifying who needs what information, how frequently do they need it, what intervals, and at what level. For example, one of the biggest complaints of the executive committee or maybe your board of directors or some of the stakeholders is they get too much detailed information, but they don't get information at a high enough level that they can see things from a big picture and the indicators and the dashboards that they need to see to make calls, maybe shift the direction or make important executive decisions that they need to make. And they can't do that with too much information, too much detailed information. Likewise, some of the people at the detailed level, maybe it's your technical team or it's a construction team, the line workers of the project may not be getting enough detail. For instance, some of the people producing the deliverables may be waiting on information from other people on the project, and if they're not getting the communications that something has been delayed and maybe they won't get the information when they expect it, if they don't know that, if it's not communicated to them in a timely, regular fashion in some way that they can get that information quickly, then it's going to impact their deliverables as well. So to me, the communication plan is one of the most important plans of the projects. It sounds so simple, but it causes most of the derailments of projects. If you look at some of the research and statistics, it always comes near the top, one of the top reasons for project failures. There's some myths around communication that teams do not like meetings. Well, that's actually a myth because people do like meetings. People do not like meetings where there's no agenda. People do not like meetings where people leave and they're not sure what actions, who's going to be doing what, so there's no follow-up. People do not like meetings that last too long or maybe the wrong people are involved. People do not like meetings where they do not start on time, they do not end on time, and they do not cover the agenda. And then some people just refuse now to go to meetings where there is no agenda. So there's simple things that can be put in place. Schedule meetings regularly, keep them on time, on track, have a specific agenda, keep to the agenda, log anything for sidebar to be covered later, but keeping things on track and getting information flowing at the proper levels is very important. So can you tell I like that one? I really love the communication plan. So the next one is creating a procurement plan. So depending upon what type of environment, you may be involved at different levels. So for instance, my background is in large corporate, so had an entire organization who handled procurement or supply chain. And in some groups, some of my colleagues are involved in, they handle the procurement. And so it depends on your environment. However, needless to say, whether you're the one coordinating the procurement or if you have an entire department, then the procurement plan is still important. Again, and that has to do with how you're going to procure resources. Are they going to be sourced? Are they going to be in-house? How are you going to procure equipment? How are you going to get it there? And so that's the important part of the procurement plan. Contract the suppliers. Again, contracting the suppliers may be part of the procurement plan. It just depends on the organizations, but you have to know how you're going to contract your suppliers, what contracts need to be in place, what type of contracts, if they're fixed fee, it's how you set up your contracts, if they're time and materials. So that needs to be known so you know how to set up the budget for your project and how to pay and when to pay your suppliers that may be paid upon deliverables or milestones of the project. So those are the sub-plans of the project plan. So quite a bit of detailed information, but again, the plans are exactly that. It tells the plan, the process. What is the process for the project plan and the associated sub-plans? What's the process? If they change, how are we going to make changes to the plan? Who are we going to inform? who's responsible for the approvals. So that is an important piece that feeds into the next item, which is perform phase review. So this one is very important because now at this point, the plans are going to be handed over and used for the project execution and the monitoring and controlling of the project. So you want the plan to be updated. You want it to be communicated to all parties on the team, all your stakeholders, the project teams involved, because this is the plan that everyone will be using, referencing, updating, and running your project. So you give that to the team members, and then now we are, if at the end of the phase review, everything looks like it's ready to go, then you head towards execution. If not, then you cycle back through. You go back, you identify the areas that need more information, and then you go get the information, because you don't want to begin the executing, monitoring, and controlling without the outputs. Remember, so we're producing outputs of the project planning phase, and those outputs feed as inputs into the project execution. So you take the inputs and you use this information to now we begin building the deliverables. The deliverables, again, this could be a project that's producing a product, or it could be producing a service. So, but the deliverables are produced from this part of the project life cycle. So we're building deliverables, we're monitoring and controlling the project. So we're using the plan, and within the plan we have the time. We know the timeline that it's going to take to deliver this project. We now know the budget it's going to take for this project. We know the resources. We know the quality standards that we're going to have. And now we're going to use all that information to monitor and control. So if you look on the screen, you'll see the yellow blocks. And these are the controlling mechanisms that we use for the project. So here we start performing the time management aspects of the project. So we begin looking here, how are we meeting the schedule? Are we on time? Are we following the timeline? Are we still on schedule from a time perspective? And again, here we're looking at things where we're looking at, are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? If we're behind schedule, what are the things that we have to do to get this back on track? So we go to the project plan to see how we get that back on track. Then we're also looking at cost. So we're performing the cost analysis. So during the executing, monitoring, controlling part of the phase, the team members are providing information back to the project manager on where they are. They're providing project status. Remember, from setting up the project office, you have some type of system in place to measure the timeline and the cost and the budget. So as deliverables are being produced, so you're spending money at this point. You're spending money on people resources. You're spending money on products. And maybe if you were getting some piece of equipment that maybe was delayed and you had to execute getting equipment from some other area, maybe you forgot something out of the project. You didn't identify some piece of materials, maybe equipment or something, some supplies, so that you didn't account for. That goes back into the cost management system, because we have to see, are we still within budget? Are we over budget? Are we under budget? Those are the type of things that we're looking for in the cost management. Then we perform the quality management part of the project. Again, this is more around quality statistics. For those of you who may be in manufacturing, there are statistics that come out in maybe the gauge of steel, maybe the gauge of plastics or any kind of materials. It could be something where if you're producing software, maybe the quality of it is, it can't have so many defects. It has to, the software has to work at a quality level. So some organization or some group or your internal group is providing the metrics of what must be met. And then as the deliverables are produced, you're comparing, okay, how does this meet? How does this gauge, or how does this measure up to the statistics, the quality metrics that we have to meet? And if it doesn't, again, it goes, you use the associated part of the project plan to say, uh-oh, this is not meeting the specs, this is not meeting our quality objectives, what do? So you go back to the quality management part of your plan to determine how do we get this back on track. Who needs to review this? Who needs to approve it in order to get it back on track? Is it acceptable to let it go as it is, or do we have to scrap this and start over? Then we look at performing the change management. My favorite part is, as a true project manager, once I get my beautiful schedule made and all of the timelines and all my resources that I want, maybe I have my dream team, and then what happens? It obviously changes. Someone comes along to mix up my apple cart. So I have to start over. I have to make changes to my schedule, and maybe I have to swap out some team members, or maybe something got delayed. So I have to invoke my change management plan. So what happens is maybe I find out that I have to swap out a resource. Maybe I need additional resources on my team. Maybe some of the resources I have, maybe I find out they're not trained, so I need to get some experts involved. Maybe equipment's not going to get there on time. But something has evoked a change. A lot of times it may be my stakeholders, or maybe the end users who come up, and they may want to, at the time we're doing this, actually expand the scope. So something may change the scope of the project. So maybe they want to expand it, so you have to take those changes back to your change control board. Have the change control board evaluate the change and approve the change. So the beauty of being the project manager, we're not the ones responsible for making that decision. We are the ones responsible for collecting all the information, the relative information about that change, making sure the people on the team are providing input on what this change, how this change will impact the project. But that information is taken to the change control board for the stakeholders to evaluate to see how they want to handle that, because any change invoked actually impacts your triple constraint. So of the triple constraint, you want to see what needs to be done to keep the triple constraint balanced. That's the infamous change control board. Next is performing risk management. Again, what I see is teams are great at identifying the risks. They identify them, and then they go into the plan never to be considered again. Well, that's not everyone, but it's very frequent that people are very good at identifying the risk, but they don't identify what we're going to do if this risk event occurs. So it's like being at home. So maybe in your home you have, or your office, say your office area. In the office you have, say, a plan, an evacuation plan if there were to be a fire. So you have an evacuation plan if there were to be maybe some event of Mother Nature, maybe a storm, or maybe something where the people have to evacuate. So there is a plan, and you know if that risk event occurs, you really want to know at that point what to do. So if you're in the office area, I know some people have someone on the floor as the fire chief, and they have a little hat they wear. So you know if a fire happens in the building, then you look for the person with the little orange hat or the red hat, and they lead you out of the building. Well, we want the same thing for our projects. We want to know if the risk event occurs, then we want to be able to have already evaluated, would this have a big impact to the project? Would this have a small impact to the project? And you already want to know in advance what actions are we going to take if this risk event is to occur. so you don't find yourself, if, say, for instance, of your office area, if a fire were to happen in your office, you don't want to be scrambling around trying to figure out what's the exit door. You already want to know the exit door, and you want to know how to get out and where you're supposed to go. Same thing on your project. So the risk management plan is very important, because some of the risks that occur, if you already have a plan in place, it's least likely to delay your project. It's least likely to wreck your budget. You already know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of evoking that plan. So you want to know how that plan is going to be handled. Then performing issue management. This is another area where teams may be tracking issues, but if they're just tracking issues in, say, like a log, but nothing's ever happening, then issues aren't getting addressed, and they can compound problems or issues on your project. So with issues management, you want to be sure as the project manager that you are constantly polling your team, making sure that issues are being raised, they're being documented, they're being handled in a timely manner, they're being escalated if necessary to get the appropriate people to support getting those issues resolved in a timely manner so they don't impact your budget, they don't impact your timeline, they don't impact your resources. So it's very important to keep issues managed, maintained, and up to date. And the people who are working on the projects are the most important people to know what issues are occurring. So you want to look for, as a project manager, you want to make sure your team members aren't sitting on those or hiding those. If you've seen in some environments where maybe for political reasons people don't want to indicate that there is an issue going on because they don't know the political ramifications that may happen, they may not want to get blamed, so they sit on issues. So not only have you got to constantly make sure those issues are rising, but you've got to take signs from your team. Does this make sense? You know, does it sense like things are taking too long, or you can tell from the behaviors of your team if someone's hiding an issue that needs to be surfaced. Generally, if it's surfaced, again, it can be the issue is raised, it's addressed, it's handled, it's escalated, or whatever needs to happen to get the issue gone. The other one is perform procurement management. So again, on most projects, you're procuring something, whether it's procuring people resources or supplies or something, so you constantly want to know if something gets off track on your project. You know, how do we procure? What are we doing to procure things? Maybe you need to procure more equipment, or maybe a supply or something that was unexpected. So you want to keep, you know, that's an item that you always have to check. How are we doing on the procurement items? The next one is acceptance management. So very important during the project execution and monitoring and controlling phase. Remember, this is the part of the project where deliverables are being produced. So whether it's product deliverables or service deliverables, something's being produced. And so something's being produced, it's gone through the quality management, you've tested it, you've made sure that it's working. Now you're ready to get maybe the testing teams to look at it and accept it so that it can now go to your user acceptance, to get the user acceptance testing, or whoever is in charge as part of this plan to review it, evaluate it, and approve it. It's very important to keep the deliverables evaluated and accepted and approved real time, as quickly as possible according to the project plan. One thing that you don't want to happen is save everything to the very end. So now you're at the end of the project, and now people are just now beginning to look at and evaluate the deliverables to find that maybe something's not meeting the specs. And so it has to go back to maybe the project planning phase. Something didn't get planned correctly. Maybe the requirements weren't identified correctly. So it had to go back to the beginning of the project. That is a total project derailer. It's very hard to get things back on track, and it's more or less going to impact your time, your budget, your resources in some form or fashion. That's a very important piece to get the user acceptance. And again, so here's my favorite. We're back to my favorite, the communications management. So again, getting information out. So you're performing your communications management. So remember that thorough communication plan that you've now created, you created as part of the project planning phase. Now you're using that to disseminate and disperse information, whether it's electronic, whether you have a server or some repository, whether you're emailing information or however you're communicating the information, that information is getting out timely to all the team members, to the stakeholders, to the user. Everyone's informed. So that's being done as part of the project execution, the monitoring and controlling part of the project. And a big piece of all of these phases is the baseline of your project schedule, your project budget. All of the documents are baseline because it's part of the execution, the monitoring and controlling. Something's going to change. So one thing that would help improve the statistics of failed projects is to go back once something does change, and we know it always does at some level, in some form or fashion, something changes on the project. But what happens is, one reason that things are deemed failed is that people forget to go back through the formal process to get things approved. If a change occurs and you go through your change control process of your project and it gets evaluated, it gets approved by your change control board, they're making the decisions of how they approve if it's going to impact the budget, the schedule. They help manage the triple constraint. So if you take that to the change control board, everyone agrees, and the plans, the project plan, the schedule, the timeline, the budget all gets re-baselined because everyone's now agreed. That can change the aspects of your project where, yes, something did change, but now you've all agreed to change the timeline or you've agreed to change the budget. So therefore, it's not considered a failed project because everyone who is authorized to make those approvals and changes and decisions have agreed that it's okay to extend the timeline. They've all agreed and accepted and approved to change the budget, so it's not deemed failed. So those are some of the little tips and techniques and best practices so as not to have your project at the end evaluated as a failed project, which goes into project closure. So again, at the end of this project, we perform our phase review. We've made sure that we've completed all the deliverables, again, whether they're product deliverables or service deliverables. We've made sure, okay, we've produced everything that we said that we were going to produce, and if not, we've gone to the change control board and we've had approval or guidance and approval to handle those. Maybe if they weren't completed or didn't meet guidelines, maybe it was agreed to put some deliverables in phase 2. So whatever those decisions are, they've evaluated, they've been documented, and you move into the project closure phase. So you perform the project closure activities, you perform your project completion. Some of the main items that we don't want to forget in the project closure part of the project is finishing, again, the user acceptance, the sign-offs. It's very important to get the sign-offs that you need into the project. You need the contracts are signed here because at the end of a project, if you're using suppliers or vendors, these are the approvals that you need for contracts so they can get paid for their part of the project. And you also make sure documentation is completed and it's archived, it's available for team members to access later in the future if necessary. And also, again, important piece, lessons learned, because those lessons learned will serve not only for use on similar projects or your next project or next phase of this project, or if nothing else, for other team members or you yourself as the project manager. So once all those items are done, we're at the end of a project. So that's a lot of work. The project manager is key to coordinating all of these efforts among all the team members, the stakeholders, the project team. So once we've done there, so you wonder, how can I get that done? We're working more and more trying to work with project managers to increase efficiencies. A lot of the questions we have are, how do we do that? People are always looking for templates and ways to increase their efficiency, whether it's someone, again, people on the call may be people who've managed projects for years, but always looking for what is another resource, what's a new resource I can use, something that helps my efficiency, how can I do this quicker, faster, cheaper. People who are new on the call may say, wow, I don't even know where to start. I remember starting project management. I have a technology background, so I played more of a technical role on projects before I moved into the project management phase. And although I was always a team member, wow, now that I had those project management responsibilities, my questions were, where do I start? How do I start? What are my tools? What are my templates? So those are some of the general questions that we get. So if you look on this slide, the project management resources, here are some resources and maybe some guidelines, some areas where you can consider looking. So resources that we find that are very helpful and people always ask about are life cycle phases, activities, and tasks. So what we showed you today are very high level, just again, overview of project management and the life cycle, some of the things that have to be done, the activities and tasks that have to be done to produce those deliverables. But a lot of people are familiar, again, with the methodology by PMI, the Project Management Institute. There's the Prince methodology. There's MPMM here. ProjectManager.com provides a methodology. Practical templates on finding templates that have all of the aspects that we talked about. The templates including things to support the process and who needs to do what and when. And then example case studies. And people are always looking for how can I find something or a case study of something that I've done before and related topics. So here I say Google is our best friend. So Google is a best friend where you can go Google this. What ProjectManager.com has done is pulled information together over years of experience in consulting and training and just experience out in the field, pull some great templates together that are used by many people. There's their MPMM methodology that you can access. But for one of the next step, leads into the next step. So just as a reference again, you can go out to Google and you can search, do all kinds of searches for project management templates. You can do Google searches for project management methodologies, all types of training. ProjectManager.com has pulled a lot of things together to save people time and effort. They also built a huge community of project managers worldwide working on all types of projects, pulling them together, bringing that expertise here. So ProjectManager.com, if you haven't been there, I invite you to go to ProjectManager.com. ProjectManager.com is very social. We're very social. We love to talk with people. We have a team of people in customer support who can help you. If you're looking at the screen, there's a way that you can call us. Calling us, we love to talk with people, answer any questions that you have. If you are more of an email person, you can email support@projectmanager.com with questions you might have. Here's what I love. Join us. We have a very social project management community out there. If you go to LinkedIn and you search for Project Manager Community, you have access to over 100,000 project managers who are very active. You can look at some of the discussion groups, and they're solving real-time project management issues. They're questions. You can start your own discussion groups like I showed you in the beginning. Start a discussion. You may have a discussion and you have access to people all over the world who can help you. It's just phenomenal. If you want to follow us, we tweet out project tips all the time. We hold webinars, videos. We do research. We are always sending out project tips. So you can find us at twitter.com project tips and follow us, and you'll get those automatically. You can like us too. We like people to like us on Facebook. If you go to Facebook and you search for Project Manage, you can see things posted on the wall. You can see other people connected. But here's the thing that I would invite you to do too. Here on projectmanager.com, they're offering a 30-day free trial. You can check out some of their resources, their templates. It's a very great tool. They've integrated some of the social features. If you go to projectmanager.com, you can actually go through a demo. You can do a demo and do the trial. It's just a really great tool. I can't say enough about it. So I want to thank you for joining us today. So again, I'm Jennifer, and myself and the entire team at projectmanager.com. Thanks you for joining us, and we hope you visit us soon. Take care for now. Bye-bye.